The 90s rewarded optimism, and Hollywood spent the decade actively avoiding anything that felt like genuine pain. These are the films that went there anyway, the ones that collapsed at the box office, haunted everyone who found them, and never really left. Trainspotting drops into Mark Renton's life at the point where he has tried to get clean more times than he can count, surrounded by people in Edinburgh who are either destroying themselves faster or dragging him back down, with one drug deal on the horizon that represents his last realistic chance at walking away from all of it. To prepare, the cast attended sessions run by a Glasgow recovery group where former addicts walked them through the mechanics of preparing a shot, making the point that heroin use was less a dark ritual than a mundane, exhausting routine. And McGregor dropped 28 pounds and eventually insisted on using a real needle for one scene just to feel what his character felt. Boyle's most deliberate choice was shooting the highs as genuinely euphoric, giving the audience the rush before taking it away, because showing only the damage would let viewers stay detached, and Boyle built the whole film to prevent that. He shoots Edinburgh like it's closing in, handheld and claustrophobic, so the city itself feels like part of the addiction, somewhere you can't quite escape no matter how fast you move through it. Danny Boyle made a promise to McGregor after the film, and then broke it, quietly handing the lead of his next project to a more bankable name without a word. McGregor found out through the press, and for 20 years one of the best director-actor partnerships British film had produced was just two men not returning each other's calls, because someone in a studio somewhere decided loyalty was worth less than a bigger name on a poster. Requiem for a Dream puts four people in Brooklyn on a collision course with addiction. A lonely widow hooked on diet pills, chasing a dream of appearing on television, her son and his girlfriend running a drug deal that keeps falling apart, and his best friend spiraling alongside them, none of them realizing they are all heading toward the same collapse. Jennifer Connelly was a nursing mother during the shoot, filming some of the most dehumanizing scenes ever put on screen by day and going home to her infant at night, and she described it as living two completely separate lives at the same time. Ellen Burstyn, 67 years old, spent 4 hours in makeup every morning before filming up to 14 hours a day in prosthetic suits that caused her genuine physical pain, and still lost the Oscar to Julia Roberts and Erin Brockovich, a result the industry is still arguing about. Aronofsky uses rapid montage sequences of pills dissolving, pupils dilating, and hands moving on autopilot to make addiction look mechanical rather than dramatic. So by the time the characters are suffering, you've already watched their bodies being rewired. He then shoots all four in split screen as they collapse simultaneously, the frame fracturing the way their lives do. So by the end, you're watching four people fall apart at the same moment without any of them knowing it. The final sequence runs all four characters through their worst possible outcome at the same time, scored with music that builds like a panic attack rather than a film score, and it is one of the most haunting endings in 90s cinema for exactly that reason. Dirk Diggler starts as a dishwasher and ends up the most famous face in the San Fernando Valley adult film industry through the late 70s in Boogie Nights, only to watch the excess and the cocaine dismantle everything once the 80s arrive and the industry shifts to video. Burt Reynolds tried to punch Paul Thomas Anderson on set, the crew physically restrained them, and production shut down for the day with Reynolds at 51 and Anderson at 26, the tension building since Reynolds decided the subject matter was beneath him and the director was too young and too confident to tolerate. Anderson opens the film with a continuous 3-minute tracking shot through a nightclub that moves through the room, introducing every major character and establishing the warmth of that world before the film slowly takes it apart, so that by the time everything collapses, the audience has already spent enough time inside that life to understand what is being lost. When the film opened to universal acclaim, Reynolds found himself campaigning for an Oscar for a film he refused to watch, and he was the frontrunner for Best Supporting Actor, but almost certainly lost to Robin Williams, because he spent the entire awards season publicly trashing the movie, right up until the moment he needed those same people to vote for him. Wahlberg spent years afterward telling interviewers he had asked God for forgiveness for the role. Reynolds never acknowledged it was the best work of his career, and the gap between what he made and what he admitted to making followed him for the rest of it. Magnolia runs 9 strangers through a single day in the San Fernando Valley. A dying television producer, his estranged son, a former quiz kid falling apart, a cop falling in love, a current quiz kid under unbearable pressure, all of them connected in ways none of them know. And Tom Cruise watched Boogie Nights, picked up the phone, and begged Anderson for a role that would dismantle everything he had spent 2 decades building. Anderson wrote him a motivational speaker who built a career teaching men to manipulate women, the last character anyone would expect Cruise to play. And Anderson scores the film with songs that function as emotional forecasts, letting the audience hear where each character is heading before the narrative gets there. So the music consistently arrives at the grief before the story does. The most devastating scene in the film was shot while the actor playing the dying father was genuinely battling a terminal infection in real life, and the crew stayed silent for hours after the take. Anderson had been given $37 million and told he could do whatever he wanted, which is how 8,000 rubber frogs ended up dropped from a soundstage ceiling for the climax. And during rehearsals, an actor pointed out the frog plague was a direct reference to the Book of Exodus, which Anderson had no idea about, having written the scene purely as a way of processing his own father's death from cancer. The film grossed $48 million, earned 3 Oscar nominations, and is still being argued over more than 2 decades later. Jim Carroll was a gifted high school basketball player in New York who lost everything to heroin, ended up homeless and selling himself on the streets, and eventually wrote a memoir about surviving it, and the Basketball Diaries adapts that story with the role originally belonging to River Phoenix before his overdose in 1993. A 19-year-old DiCaprio walked into that audition knowing exactly whose seat he was filling, with his agents warning him that showing a teen idol convulsing on a bathroom floor would permanently close doors, and DiCaprio went anyway. He spent time with the real Carroll, visited the actual doorways where he had slept, and screamed through the withdrawal sequence until his vocal cords were partially damaged, with production halting 2 days for his physical exhaustion. The director shoots without wide shots, just tight close-ups of a face, losing itself frame by frame, refusing to give viewers the establishing shot that would allow any emotional distance. And Lorraine Bracco said she found the filming deeply upsetting because DiCaprio's performance was convincing enough that she felt she was watching a child die on the other side of a door. A dream sequence where the character opens fire on his classmates became the focal point of a $100 million lawsuit following 2 real school shootings. The film was pulled from shelves for nearly a decade, and the sequence is still edited out of many streaming versions today, leaving the film permanently associated with a debate it never asked to be part of. Sleepers follows 4 boys from a New York neighborhood whose prank goes wrong, landing them in a juvenile detention facility where they spend a year being abused by the guards and carry that experience forward into adulthood until 2 of them run into one of their abusers on the street, and the film becomes about what they decide to do with that. The rights to the memoir sold at auction for $2.1 million on the strength of a true story label before the Manhattan District Attorney investigated and found 0 records. No trial, no boys ever sent to the reform school, with the DA stating publicly that none of the crimes in the book ever happened. The author doubled down, saying he had altered names and dates to protect people, which is hard to sustain when investigators cannot find evidence the events happened at all. And Levinson made the film anyway because the story was about something recognizable, regardless of whether it was real. Levinson shoots the childhood sequences in warm amber light and the adult sequences in cold gray, and the color shift registers in the body before the brain processes it, telling you everything about what those years cost before a single line of dialogue explains it. Kevin Bacon isolated himself so completely that he didn't meet De Niro or Dustin Hoffman until the Venice premiere, staying in a predatory headspace that made the child actors genuinely uncomfortable around him. And the film grossed $165 million worldwide, on a story the district attorney said never happened. Gia Karanji arrived in New York from Philadelphia in the late 70s and rewrote what the fashion industry thought beauty was supposed to look like. Went from the covers of major magazines to shooting heroin backstage, and died of AIDS at 26. The film about her life starred a 22-year-old Angelina Jolie, who finished the shoot, told the press she was quitting acting, and flew to New York to enroll in film school. She had cut off all contact with her friends and her husband for the entire production, lived alone in a Hollywood hotel, refused to break character between takes. And by the final hospital scenes, the prosthetic sores and weeks of deliberate isolation had pushed her somewhere. She told the New York Times she wasn't sure she could walk back from. The director shoots in fragments, using jump cuts and washed-out color to collapse the timeline, so that the glamour and the ruin keep appearing in the same frame, reflecting the way Gia's rise and destruction were never actually separate events, but the same one unfolding simultaneously. Jolie won the Golden Globe for a production that was ineligible for Academy consideration, and anyone who followed her career in the years after can see in the work that came next exactly how much of that shoot stayed with her. Mickey and Mallory Knox fall in love, go on a cross-country killing spree, and become the most famous couple in America in natural-born killers, with the film spending as much time indicting the cameras chasing them as the killers themselves. Tarantino wrote the script, sold it, and has publicly disowned what Oliver Stone made from it ever since, which tells you something about how far the finished film traveled from its starting point. Stone shot across 58 different film formats, deliberately cutting between grainy handheld footage, animation, and newsreels inside single scenes, so the visual grammar keeps breaking down in the same way the character's grip on reality does. Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis developed such an intense platonic bond during filming that Stone later said it added something to the central relationship no amount of direction could have manufactured. 2 people with genuine trust in each other playing 2 people who trusted nobody else. The film was linked to at least 8 copycat killings in the years after release. Families pursued lawsuits for years, courts eventually dismissed them all, and it grossed $115 million on a $34 million budget, while Tarantino never saw a cent of it and still won't put his name on it. The film argued that media turns carnage into entertainment and audiences into willing participants. And then audiences went out and demonstrated it was right. Stone won every commercial argument, Tarantino kept the moral high ground, and neither of them has seemed comfortable with that outcome since. Leaving Las Vegas centers on Ben Sanderson, a Hollywood screenwriter who drives into Las Vegas with a car full of liquor and a plan to drink himself to death, where he meets a prostitute named Sarah who agrees to stay with him on the condition that she never tries to change him. And that agreement between two people who have both given up on being saved is what the entire film is built around. Nicolas Cage spent 2 weeks in Dublin studying himself drunk on videotape, watching his own slurred speech and stumbling walk so he could recreate it sober on camera, hired a local poet to whisper things in his ear between takes, and did all of this for $100,000 he was never paid. The production couldn't afford permits, so the strip scenes were shot guerrilla style with a handheld camera. Real tourists wandering through as accidental extras, the crew jumping into vans before anyone could ask for paperwork. And that grain gives the whole film a rawness no studio production could fake. The director scored it with jazz that already sounds like mourning, so the music is processing the loss of these characters before they have lost anything yet. And that forward-leaning grief is where the film does its real damage. Cage won the Oscar. The studio cited creative accounting and the checks never arrived, and he said the award was worth more than the money, which is the kind of thing you say when the other option is admitting you worked for free. Every Friday night during the Schindler's List shoot, Robin Williams would call Steven Spielberg, do 15 minutes of stand-up over the phone with no hello and no small talk, just jokes until Spielberg finally laughed and then hang up without saying goodbye. Spielberg was in Poland filming the Holocaust by day and editing Jurassic Park footage at night, and the depression had gotten bad enough that laughter felt like something from a different life. The film centers on Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who arrives in Nazi-occupied Poland looking to profit from the war and ends up spending everything he has to save over 1,000 Jewish workers from the camps. And Spielberg directed the entire $22 million production for free because he felt taking a salary would be wrong, given the subject matter. Ralph Fiennes gained 28 pounds, studied archival footage until the physical resemblance was exact, and when he was introduced to a Holocaust survivor on set, she began shaking uncontrollably just from looking at him while he was still in costume. Spielberg shot the whole film in black and white, not as a style choice but as a moral one, because color would have made it cinematic, and distance was the last thing he wanted. What Universal expected to quietly disappear grossed $322 million, won 7 Oscars, and is now mandatory viewing in school systems across multiple continents. And every Friday night, a phone would ring in Poland so a friend could check that the director was doing all right. These films asked more from the people who made them than any movie should, and somehow that is exactly why they are still here.